State of roads in farming communities is frustrating food producers, and poor conditions and lack of maintenance and repairs led to increased costs. We speak now from the Road Freight Association. We have Gavin Kelly. Thank you so much for joining us, Gavin, and good morning to you. You know, we've been highlighting the plight, particularly of farmers and food producers, with regards to the road infrastructure. Your organization, established in 1975, maybe you can give us a picture and the context as how things have changed since then.
Good morning, Cindy, and good morning to all your viewers. One of the biggest problems I think that we're all experiencing is the change in weather. So we've seen a number of very serious weather events over the last couple of years, over the last 10 years. You'll recall that heavy flooding happening in KwaZulu-Natal about 3 years ago. We now have that happening in the Western Cape, especially around a fair amount of the areas where there's large farming activities. And we see that in many instances, we haven't kept up as a country with the maintenance of roads. So we haven't kept the stormwater drains clean, we haven't looked after the potholes, and in many instances in the agricultural sector, the roads are not tarred all the way to the farms. This would be an impossible task, and that's not what we're calling for. But one would require that those secondary roads, which are mainly dirt roads, are maintained just as well as tar roads are maintained. So they would need to be graded, they need to be compacted, and of course water runoff, which is the big thing we're really struggling with in the last couple of years. So water remains on the road, the trucks get bogged down, and of course that then has huge delays in trying to get produce to the market and for export.
Yeah, so now we had a bit of a sample yesterday, first-hand experience of being on the ground with the farming community and their frustrations there. What we also hear is the fact that because of the different levels of government structures, the different layers of government as to who does what, it's very difficult now for the South African Road Agency, for example, to intervene in smaller communities and tar the roads or even give the required support. What happens then, Gavin, if things remain the same? How then are you going to improve the situation?
Well, Cindy, I think we mustn't point a finger at the three levels of government and say it's wrong or it's incorrect. When those systems were created, it was a very sound policy. So you created three levels of government so that the actual authorities or those people who managed communal affairs were right there at the coalface. So you have local, provincial and national structures, and obviously local structures require funding to be given to them from the National Treasury, and that comes through a process of budgeting and through the provinces. We can't expect SANRAL, for example, to look after every single road. I think that would be really unfair and they would collapse. But what we do need to do is to ensure that at the various levels, that there is some registry or some collection of data in terms of the condition of the roads, and that is then prioritized. So, for example, those sorts of agricultural products that are coming down a road that has high volume, so let's say plenty of maize or wheat or beef or whatever the case is, that those roads are checked and that they are brought into a state that won't render them useless when there's inclement weather. I think that's really the process we need to look at. And the president has created a crisis committee relating to logistics in the country, and perhaps we need to filter that sort of structure down to the provincial and local levels.
Yeah, but if you were to reflect on the national roads, you were referring to, SANRAL's responsible for, which are in immaculate condition, one could argue. And you see a number of trucks with heavy loads, in all areas of the country. So it seems that at least the infrastructure is stable there with regards to heavy loads. Would you agree to this?
Well, Cindy, on some of the national roads, those roads are in condition that's even better than in other countries around the world. We as South Africans don't realize that we have a first-class road network in many of our national routes, for which we must be very thankful. And SANRAL does a sterling job. There are secondary routes or regional routes that SANRAL has now been given by provinces, because the provinces seem not either to have the capacity to look after these roads or the skills, and I'm sure that's going to be a discussion on its own. But SANRAL does a very good job in terms of looking after the roads. What we do need to ensure, though, is that roads that we use as alternative roads are actually built to carry the load in the first instance, because some of these roads were built in the 60s and 70s. They weren't built for the modern sorts of vehicles that travel on there today, nor the number of vehicles. And secondly, we have to get our rail network working, because a fair amount of freight that is on the road should really be on the rails.
And that led me to the next question. In having an integrated transport system, we tend to reflect on what worked previously, and for some reason, the continuation was not necessarily there. But what do we do now, Gavin, especially where we hear reports of even illicit trade going on some of the smaller routes because there's lack of visibility of authorities or lack of control of where, what comes in and out of the country? Are you aware of this kind of practice and the impact it has even on the smaller rural roads?
Yes, everyone is aware of that sort of practice, and it is unfortunately one of the symptoms that we have that have brought us into the context of where we're sitting. So where we don't have authorities that are either strong enough to perform their mandates or have enough capacity to perform their mandates, you will have those who are going to try and make the best of a bad situation. So smuggling happens. You will find that on some routes that are not built and are in actual fact signposted not to be used, that people will use those routes. They will look for any sort of access into or out of the country to dodge duties or any sort of anti-smuggling law. So that is a large challenge. We need to ensure that the actual facilities that we use, so the borders, the border posts, the processes, are in actual fact streamlined to ensure we can deal with those who don't want to play by the rules.
All right, Gavin, as always, thank you so much for your time. We're speaking to Gavin Kelly from the Road Freight Association.